September 11th, 2001. The day that shook the world. But what if the real enemy wasn't hiding in a cave in Afghanistan, but walking the halls of power in Washington, D.C.? In this video, we dive deep into the explosive claims made by many skeptics and engineers throughout the world. Did the U.S. government orchestrate the most devastating attack on American soil to justify war, expand control, and fuel the military-industrial machine? Let's uncover the shocking truth that they don't want you to hear. The collapse of the Twin Towers has long been presented as the direct result of plane impacts and jet fuel-induced fires. However, many believe the buildings were brought down by a controlled demolition masked as a terror attack, a staged operation meant to justify war and strip civil liberties. Scientific studies have shown the presence of nanothermite in the debris, a military-grade explosive that can cut through steel like butter. The pulverization of concrete, the molten steel found weeks after the collapse, and the symmetrical freefall of the towers all point toward explosives being used. Survivors and first responders reported hearing a series of explosions prior to and during the tower's collapse. These testimonies were largely ignored in the official 9/11 Commission report, but they reveal that what people experienced does not align with the official version of events. The towers were designed to withstand plane impacts, yet they crumbled like sandcastles. Critics question how fire, which weakened but did not destroy similar structures in the past, could cause such a sudden and complete collapse. Ultimately, many contend that the demolitions were meticulously planned and executed to ensure maximum psychological impact. The images of collapsing towers became an emotional trigger, used to justify foreign wars and domestic surveillance laws for decades. World Trade Center 7, a 47-story steel skyscraper, was not hit by a plane on 9/11, yet it collapsed in freefall speed at 5:20 p.m. the same day. The official explanation was fire damage, but no steel-framed high-rise building had ever collapsed due to fire before. Many researchers argue that this collapse is the smoking gun of a controlled demolition. Architects, engineers, and demolition experts have repeatedly pointed out that the building fell symmetrically and directly into its own footprint, a behavior consistent only with a precisely timed demolition. The sudden onset, uniform acceleration, and total destruction of the building suggest that internal supports were removed simultaneously. Footage of World Trade Center 7's fall shows classic signs of demolition: visible small explosives, kinks in the structure, and no resistance from intact steel below. Fire alone, uneven and uncontrolled, cannot account for such precision. Independent groups like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth have documented extensive evidence that fire could not have caused the building's collapse. More suspiciously, news outlet BBC reported the building's collapse over 20 minutes before it actually happened, with the still-standing tower visible in the background during the broadcast. How could they have known it would collapse if it was not pre-planned? Some suggest that World Trade Center 7 may have housed sensitive intelligence or financial documents, especially since it contained offices for the Secret Service, IRS, and SEC. Its demolition may have been an effort to destroy incriminating evidence, conveniently buried in dust and debris. While the world focused on the towers, the Pentagon attack presents its own anomalies. Officially, American Airlines Flight 77 struck the building, but the available evidence, or lack thereof, raises serious doubts. The hole in the Pentagon was far too small for a Boeing 757 to fit through. There was minimal wreckage, no recognizable plane debris, no wing marks on the building, and no evidence of a tail section or engines. Multiple security camera recordings that could have captured the strike were seized by the FBI and never released in full. Moreover, the section of the Pentagon that was hit had just been reinforced and contained financial documents related to a missing $2.3 trillion that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld announced on September 10th.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T.
Just one day before the attacks, trained military pilots have said the maneuver the plane, supposedly made before hitting the Pentagon, was nearly impossible for an experienced pilot. A tight corkscrew turn at high speed, executed by someone with minimal flight experience, must have been pure luck. The attack on the Pentagon may have been a surgical strike to destroy financial records and deliver a message of vulnerability. The lack of transparency around the incident fuels speculation that it was staged or misrepresented. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, is tasked with intercepting threats to U.S. airspace. On 9/11, it failed 4 times to stop hijacked planes, a stunning breakdown of protocol. Some believe this wasn't incompetence, but deliberate inaction. Standard protocol would have scrambled fighter jets within minutes of any aircraft going off course. Yet on that day, intercepts were delayed or misdirected, and pilots were sent out over the ocean instead of toward threats. Testimony reveals that drills simulating hijackings were being conducted the same morning, causing confusion and clogging communication lines. Were these drills coincidental, or were they designed to mask a real attack? The 9/11 Commission blamed systemic failure, but never addressed who allowed these drills to run on that specific day. Critics argue this was strategic, a cover for planned inaction that gave hijackers or operatives a clear window. To many researchers, the stand-down was an essential part of the operation. It created just enough chaos and delay to allow the attacks to proceed while preserving plausible deniability for those involved. One of the most damning consequences of 9/11 was the immediate push for war, first in Afghanistan, then Iraq. Some argue that this was the real motive behind the attacks, to open the floodgates for military intervention, oil control, and massive profits for the military-industrial complex. Within weeks, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan to target the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But why were invasion plans already in place before the attacks, suggesting premeditation? Iraq, which had no connection to 9/11, was falsely linked to Al-Qaeda through fabricated intelligence. This deception was used to justify another war, one that handed lucrative reconstruction contracts to companies like Halliburton, Lockheed Martin, and Bechtel. The war on terror became a permanent business model. Defense contractors, oil companies, and surveillance firms made trillions, while ordinary citizens gave up privacy and soldiers died for false causes. 9/11 wasn't just a false flag. It was a business plan, a manufactured crisis to generate endless war and profit under the guise of protecting freedom. One of the most chilling aspects of the 9/11 narrative is the series of phone calls allegedly made from the hijacked planes. These calls were broadcast by mainstream media as the final words of doomed passengers, cementing the emotional narrative of the day. But as David Icke outlines in his book, The Trigger, these calls are riddled with anomalies that suggest they may not have been real at all. For starters, cell phone technology in 2001 simply did not support high-altitude calls. Commercial airliners cruise at around 30,000 feet, and according to telecommunications experts, cell signals are nearly impossible to transmit or receive at those altitudes, especially while traveling at high speed. Yet many of the calls were reported to have come from cell phones rather than seatback earphones. Even more suspicious are the contents of some of the calls themselves. One widely publicized call was supposedly made by a man who identified himself by his full name to his own mother, a strange behavior in such a dire situation. Icke points to the robotic tone and scripted nature of these calls as possible signs of voice morphing technology, which had already been developed by U.S. military agencies by the late 1990s. In fact, the FBI later admitted in court that several of the calls initially reported as coming from cell phones could not have occurred as described. This has led some researchers to believe that the emotional phone calls were fabricated or pre-recorded, designed to galvanize public support for retaliation and frame the narrative in a way that shut down rational inquiry. If the phone calls were indeed faked, it suggests a level of psychological manipulation on a massive scale. The use of manufactured emotion to stir national outrage and bypass critical thinking would represent one of the most disturbing elements of the entire 9/11 operation. Icke urges readers to revisit these stories, not with emotional bias, but with a forensic lens, and ask whether they were part of the carefully engineered illusion. Another deeply unsettling revelation explored in David Icke's The Trigger involves the supposed hijackers themselves. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, the FBI released a list of 19 men they claimed were responsible for hijacking the planes. But in the days and weeks that followed, several of these individuals were reported to be alive and well, living in different parts of the world and having no connection to the attacks. For example, Walid al-Shari, one of the men, named as having crashed into the World Trade Center, was discovered alive in Morocco, outraged that his name and identity had been used. Similarly, Abdulaziz al-Omari, also on the official list, appeared on Saudi television to proclaim his innocence, explaining he was a pilot but had nothing to do with the hijackings. These were not isolated incidents. At least 6 of the 19 hijackers were confirmed by various news outlets to be alive. The implications of this are staggering. If these men weren't actually on the planes, then who was? Were these identities stolen, fabricated, or entirely manufactured by intelligence agencies to construct a believable story for the public? David Icke argues that the hijacker narrative was a smokescreen, a carefully planted set of identities to give the public villains to hate, while the real perpetrators operated in the shadows. Even mainstream media initially reported these contradictions before quickly abandoning the subject. The BBC and other international outlets covered the stories of the alive hijackers, but in the US, such anomalies were swiftly buried. Icke sees this as further evidence of media complicity in shaping and protecting the official version of events rather than investigating the truth. If the hijackers weren't who we were told they were, then the entire foundation of the 9/11 narrative collapses. It becomes not just a question of incompetence or intelligence failure, but of outright fabrication. The use of stolen identities and false attributions could indicate a deliberate attempt to mislead the public and hide the deeper agenda behind the attacks. So, what really happened on 9/11? Was it a catastrophic intelligence failure, or the most elaborate false flag operation of our time? The information in this video doesn't just poke holes in the official story. It suggests something far more sinister, that 9/11 was orchestrated to manipulate the world. Believe it or not, one thing is undeniable. The official version has cracks, and those cracks are growing wider. If you found this video eye-opening, smash that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes the mainstream narrative. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, the truth doesn't fear investigation.